everyone. Welcome back. This is week 3 of Community Candid. We've heard from 2 experts the past 2 weeks. The first week, this week in Clean, discussed financial wellness and financial retirement. And week 2, Dr. Emma Crosby spoke on mental health. This week we have another dynamic speaker and expert in his respective field. Mr. Walt Merrell will deliver a message on drug awareness and prevention. As always, we thank you for joining us. You guys are always welcome. You guys, anytime you're on this campus, you're part of the Saints family, and we just want you to feel at home. And we hope you enjoy tonight, and thank you again for coming. I'll turn it over to Dr. Shannon Levinsky.
Good evening. I am so excited to introduce our speaker. Walt Merrell is the father of 3 beautiful girls, Faye, Kate, and Banks, and is married to Perfect Woman, the former Hannah Ann. The Merrells attend Bethany Baptist Church, where Walt is an active Sunday school teacher, men's ministry organizer, and deacon. He's also a founding member of Crossover Ministry, a faith-based residential addiction recovery program, where he teaches a men's class every week. And he is a founding member and the board president of the Covington County Child Advocacy Center, which is a wonderful resource that we have here in our community. Walt and Hannah married in 1998 while Walt was in his 2nd year of law school at Cumberland School of Law at Stanford University. They met some 5 years earlier at the University of Montevallo. And after graduating from law school, Walt contemplated attending another postgraduate institution to obtain his PhD, and Hannah quickly resolved that contemplation by telling him he could get a JOB instead of a PhD. After practicing law in both the public and private sector, he was elected by the people to serve as district attorney for the 22nd Judicial Circuit of the state of Alabama. But despite all of these details, he says that if you want a short and concise definition of who he is, it is this: sinner saved by his faith in Jesus Christ and the grace of God. So we are very excited to have him speak today. Please help me welcome Walt Merrell.
Thank you, Shannon, very much. So kind to invite me here, Dr. Kelly. I appreciate very much the opportunity. I do, however, have to object. After all, I am a lawyer. I have to object to the use of the word expert. I'm not sure that I'm an expert in much of anything. However, unfortunately, life experience does give me a particularly unique perspective about drug use and about parenting aspects as it relates to drug use and about recovery. So Shannon mentioned that I am a founding board member at Crossover Ministries some 19 or 20 years ago. A man that I had put in prison came to me and said, you know, we don't have a viable means of recovery for people in Covington County. And I thought to myself, you know what an interesting observation. And unfortunately, he was correct. And so myself and 6 other men founded Crossover Ministries. We tell people routinely that we had no idea what we were doing. We just knew there was a need. And so I have people that oftentimes come to me. By the way, if you're unfamiliar, since then we have helped thousands of people through our program, and people ask me all the time, what's your success rate here? And I said, 1 to 0. I have no idea what our success rate is, but I know that we have people who are now gainfully employed, we have pastors, we have businessmen, we have plenty of people who have found true recovery through Crossover, and 1 is enough. But people come to me all the time and they say, you know, I have this great vision, but I have no idea how to bring it to fruition. And I say, well, you're in luck, because I happen to be the master of great vision with no idea how to bring it to fruition. And I say, what you need more than anything else is the elbow grease. And so parenting is much the same. Perhaps you know I've written 2 books about my experience as a dad, and they are journeys of outdoor adventure and faith, and how those 2 things come together as I raise my 3 girls. And I very carefully remind people, Dr. Kelly, that I'm not an expert in parenting either. I just have a lot of elbow grease. And sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong. So as we start through this presentation tonight, let me just encourage you first by saying, look, I don't have all the answers. And it's okay that you don't either. The main thing is that you strengthen your resolve and that you maintain your vigilance to be knowledgeable and to be aware, and to never soften in your stance on protecting your child from all the temptations and ails of the world. And so, as I have now said, I'm not an expert, let me just say, why did you ask me to be here? Right? Well, you'd be logical to ask that question, but let me just point out that personally, this, by the way, is one page of my brother's public record rap sheet off of the state computer. Now, he would not be embarrassed. I'm not shaming him at all. I'm simply pointing out to you that I grew up in a drug culture. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from high school, much less go on to college or law school. While we have several experts in the law, none of them hold degrees. I was also the first to do that. And so I come from a perspective of addiction. My father, God rest his soul, and I love him dearly, spent much of his life as a functioning alcoholic. Both of my older brothers quit school when they were 14, and they both spent much of their life in some kind of state of chemical impairment. And so, why me? Well, personally, I lived it. I grew up in it. And so I know the consequences of drug use, drug addiction, and all that flows from it. But professionally, I live it too. Those are, by the way, real death-scene photographs of drug overdoses. I was careful not to use any pictures that had any faces because I don't want to shock anyone's conscience too much. But I do, as parents, I want you to know that this is real. You know, sometimes I talk to people who say, well, you know, that kind of bad stuff just doesn't happen here in Covington County. That kind of bad stuff only happens in big cities. And no, to the contrary. That kind of bad stuff happens here all the time. In fact, yesterday, a sweet, sweet soul died. We don't have her autopsy reports yet, but I fear that they're going to say that it was a drug overdose. And I say she was a sweet soul because I worked with her for the last 6 or 8 or 10 years trying to help her find her path to sobriety. It happens all the time. It happens right here. These 2 photographs, by the way, both from Covington County. Notice I was intentional to point out that we have heroin here in Covington. We have cocaine. We obviously have methamphetamine. Perhaps the 2 most dangerous drugs that we see today are opiates and fentanyl. And so both of these overdoses, by the way, involve those. This lady right here, I just, again, to further emphasize the dangers that we see on a regular basis, her autopsy report, her toxicology report, had over 20 different drugs in her system. And so drug use is real, drug abuse is real, and the dangers of it are very real. And so do not think that you live in a bubble that is immune to it, because you don't, okay? I promise you that every one of these people, their family, at some point in time, thought this will never happen to me. And how unfortunate they were. Or how unfortunately wrong they were. I do want to mention this. Fentanyl is the most dangerous drug in society today, and here's why. First of all, fentanyl is a contact drug. If you touch fentanyl, you begin to absorb it through your skin because it is epi-absorbent. In other words, you can absorb it through the epidermal layer of your skin. You also can absorb it through your lung tissue, through your stomach tissue, and any other way you ingest it into the body, it can be absorbed. Fentanyl is a synthetic compound. It is man-made. It does not have a natural derivative. It is made in a lab. And I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you how it's made or what it's made from, but I know that the purpose is this, to enhance the effect of opiate painkillers. And so the theory medically was you take one Lortab and you add a little fentanyl to it, and the Lortab's stronger and more effective. The unfortunate reality is that you add fentanyl to a joint, and the toxicity of the THC is infinitely more powerful. You add it to methamphetamine, infinitely more addictive. You add it to cocaine, infinitely more dangerous. And so we've seen more overdoses in Covington County in the last 3 years. By the way, this picture right here, 3 people died at that same house in one night, all because they came into contact with fentanyl. They had a kilo of fentanyl. That kilo of fentanyl was destined for the streets of Covington. More people have died in Covington County in the last 3 years from drug overdoses than in the entire rest of my career. And I've been district attorney here for 12 years, and I've been in some form as a lawyer for almost 20. And so the dangers of fentanyl are very serious and very real. And what's particularly concerning to me that I want to convey to you as parents is this, is what your children do not understand is that if somebody says, hey, try a little bit of this, it won't hurt you. It's just weed, or it's just whatever, or it's just a pill. Well, it may be just something, but it happens to be laced with fentanyl, and your child doesn't know that, and the drug dealer doesn't tell them that. And now, perhaps it's not fatal, but it is infinitely more potent, and therefore the physiological reaction that occurs within inside the body triggers addictive tendencies so much quicker. By the way, drug dealers lace their product with fentanyl because they know it quickens addiction, and that guarantees them more customers. They are profiteers, and that's all they are. I should mention, well, I think I hit all that. So I did want to talk about professionally speaking. I started my career as the Drug Task Force prosecutor. I was hired when, at a time when Covington County was known nationwide for methamphetamine production and use, and so I had a vast knowledge. I can say without bragging, I'm just giving you a point of reference, that I know how to cook methamphetamine because I've been in so many methamphetamine labs and prosecuted so many methamphetamine cases. We have seen a decline and a change in how drugs are presented and how they come to Covington County now, but we still see the same consistent trends. One is we have thousands of pending drug cases right now. We don't, contrary to popular belief, put everybody in prison for getting arrested for a small amount of drugs. In fact, we have with us tonight, Jeremy Schaefer is here. She is the head of our brand new opiate diversion program, where if you're arrested for an opiate in Covington County, instead of prosecuting you, we try to get you help. We also have a drug court, and we have, I know that some of our mental health folks are here tonight. We have a drug court program that runs 150 strong. Generally speaking, Judge Short presides over the drug court. And we work really hard to get people help and not prosecute them and not incarcerate them. Every murder within the past 10 years has been because somebody wanted to get high, somebody was high, or somebody was mad that somebody else was high. And I promise you this, people ask me all the time, if you could wave a magic wand and change crime forever, what would you do? And I always have two answers. One is, I would eliminate drugs from society. And if you eliminated drugs from society, you'd see crime go down 95%. Number two is I'd put fathers back in the home. And that's nothing against a single mother who's doing her best to raise her children. I think you were true American heroes. But it is everything to include an indictment of fathers who have absconded from their role and are no longer engaged in their children's lives. And I firmly believe if you did those two things, you would see a wholesale change, not only in American culture, but also in the criminal culture of our country. Now, I mentioned before this is a real problem. And so I was asked to come here from the standpoint of modern parenting. And so I've tried to kind of cater this presentation. By the way, I've never given this presentation before. It was written specifically for y'all tonight. I've tried to cater this towards the idea of modern parenting. So I asked myself, what are the parenting problems that I encounter? And the first really is parents who tell me some manifestation that sounds something like, that won't happen to us, that won't happen to my child would never do that, my child's friends aren't like that, we've raised our children better than that. You know what, not to take away at all from your parenting skills. I have no doubt that you have raised your child with absolute integrity. But your bubble isn't big enough or strong enough to protect your child from every temptation the world has to offer. And so the first thing I need you to understand from a modern parenting perspective is that this is a very real and a very present danger. And you're not immune to it. And your family is neither. And I just want to make 2 points in that regard. Number one, it is I've never met a drug addict. By the way, my best friends are all drug addicts. I find a drug addict in recovery is so humble that they don't want anything but companionship. And I find they make the best friends. And so I've never met a drug addict who says to me, you know, I always knew I was going to be a drug addict. The teacher asked us in school, and everybody else be saying they wanted to go to the NFL and NBA, and I'd always raise my hand and say, I want to be a drug addict. Doesn't happen. But you see, as we're raising our children, and as they're raising their hands saying they want to play in the NBA, they want to be the quarterback at Alabama, or they want to be a rocket scientist, we think that bubble is strong enough to protect them. And I can give you list after list after list of friends who lost so much because their bubble wasn't strong. And so as parents, I need you to first and foremost understand and that you have to be the primary line of defense for your children. Now, I asked, just to further illustrate the point, I asked some of the longtime police officers here in the county about their experiences with arresting children. And so I just put down some of the more poignant quotes that they gave me. And here we have examples of 16-year-olds selling drugs for their older siblings. Why? Because they wanted the approval of their older siblings. 15-year-olds cooking meth with their parents. 14-year-old for using meth and pills, and he started using drugs when he was 11. And so I realized you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not my kid. I know that. But they're in the same classroom as your kid. And you don't know how much your child might want their approval. Or for example, as I encounter sometimes, I talk to a lot of young people, and occasionally I talk to a young person who says, well, you know, what is marijuana? Or what is methamphetamine? Or what do you mean drugs? Or do people really do that? And the clear indication I get from talking to the young person is their parents have never really had an honest or sincere conversation with them about drugs or the dangers associated with drugs. And if that's the case, then the first time that somebody says, well, try this, it'll make you laugh. Well, they probably don't know about it. And they try. And it does make them laugh for a while until it makes them cry. 12-year-old for using marijuana, and he'd been smoking in his room. One trafficking case, an 11-year-old had previously been caught with marijuana on the school bus. In a chemical endangerment case, a 4-year-old was walking around with a backpack with methamphetamine. I personally worked a methamphetamine case where a disabled 8-year-old little girl tested positive for methamphetamine because she was wheelchair bound and she could not get out of the room that her parents were in smoking methamphetamine. And so while I appreciate the fact that you raise your kids right, it doesn't mean that the person next door does or that their friends' parents do. And so you can't, it's not enough just to guard them against the idea. You have to guard them against the desire to have peer approval. You have to guard them against manipulation. You have to guard them against so much more because you don't know what surrounds them. Were these in Chicago, Detroit, or Atlanta? No, they were right here. Every one of those cases was right here in Covington. And look, I don't say that with glee in my heart. I think that we live in one of the best places on earth. But I am aware that we have blemishes too. And as parents, we have to be aware that our kids can be exposed to dark and dangerous things. And so what I will tell you is one of the most important things you need to do as a parent is recognize that the risk is very real and arm yourself and equip yourself with an ability to identify. And so I celebrate the fact that you're here because part of what you're doing is just that. I'm not going to read each and every one of these statistics to you, but some of them are just downright staggering. These are according to the National Center for Drug Abuse, and these are their national data-driven statistics. 21% of 8th graders have tried an illicit drug at least once. And of course, that's nationwide. And so I would expect the number in Covington to be significantly lower than that. I would hope it would be. But still, 21% of 8th graders. I oftentimes talk to parents and I'll say, well, when did you first talk to your child about, you know, the temptation of alcohol? And they'll say, well, you know, when they were in 8th or 9th grade, we mentioned to them about the dangers of don't get in the car when somebody's drinking. And when did you first talk to them about, the dangers of drug use? Well, when they turned 16 or 17, we talked to them about that. When did you first talk to them about sex? Well, when they were 17 or 18, we talked about that. Look, 6 out of 10 11-year-old boys view pornography once a week on the internet. And so if you're waiting until your kid's a junior in high school to talk to them about these very real and complicated issues, somebody else already taught your child about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. By the way, the rock and roll thing's okay. I encourage you to go look at the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics. Their website is very informative, very helpful, and frankly, it's downright alarming at times. Now, so if we're talking about parenting, and with the qualification that I'm not an expert parent or an expert drug counselor, I came up with a list of things that I see routinely in my profession that I thought I at least ought to convey to you. Okay, and so some of the things that I think you should be saying to your kids, or some of the things that you have to be aware of as you're talking to your kids, is number one, our kids are much smarter than we were when we were their age. Right? So I remember, for example, when I was in 8th or 9th grade, I don't really remember the exact age, the first time I ever saw Playboy magazine. And listen, I thought, me and my two buddies, we thought we were the coolest kids in the whole neighborhood because we had seen a Playboy magazine. And now 11-year-olds are routinely seeing people have sex on the internet. And so when I tell you that kids are way more intelligent, they're way more savvy than we were at their age. And so one of the first mistakes we make as parents is we automatically think that they are where we were at the same age. And the truth is, they're probably more in tune to what's going on in the world at 12 than we were at 20. And so first and foremost, don't over-dramatize the risk. They're not stupid. And so, now I'm not telling you to minimize the risk either, but I have heard time and time again a young person say, well, you know what, my mama told me that if I did drugs, I'd be dead. And I know plenty of people that do drugs and they aren't dead. Well, I have very little way to respond to that because the statement is accurate. So don't over-dramatize the risk. Don't tell your children that if they do marijuana, they'll be hopelessly addicted. The statistics say that 1 in 8 people that use marijuana are addicted. But that means 7 of 8 aren't. So you need to be very real and just say, look, there's an opportunity for you to become addicted. There's an opportunity for you to have a fatal car wreck. There's an opportunity for something bad to happen. But don't lose your own credibility as a parent by trying to scare them straight. Because they're much more intelligent than you were at that same age. And so given that fact, the best thing you can do is be real with them and be honest with them and say, sure, you might smoke marijuana and not have any consequences. But what if you do? Right? Sure, you might drink alcohol and not have any consequences, but what if you do? Every one of those people that I showed you that had overdosed, statistically, the odds might have been in their favor. I don't know. But I know that's not how it turned out. And I also think that the consequences of drug use are much more prolific and much more pronounced if you leave death out of the conversation. The relationship between drug use and high school dropout rates is undeniable. By the way, the relationship between fatherless homes and high school dropout rates is undeniable as well. The relationship between drug abuse and criminal arrest rate is undeniable. So there are a lot of things that you can have solid conversations with your kids about that don't involve the egg frying in the frying pan. And only some of y'all got that reference. Right? So don't lose your credibility because they're smarter than we were. Do teach them about the realities of addiction and do it with real data and real information. You know, one of the things our parents, I remember my mom when I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. By the way, I grew up in a single parent home. And my mother had the dubious distinction of being the one that got to teach me about the birds and the bees. And she bought me a coloring book. It didn't have anatomical correctness to it, but that was the best media she had available to her to try to aid her with that. And we had the media of the world at our fingertips. And so you yourself can find video of people that are dying, people that are having tragic car wrecks, people that are overdosing. There's plenty of media available to you. And you know what our children love? Media. And so, teach them about addiction instead of just relying on scare tactics. Because the other thing is our children won't scare nearly as easily as we do. Don't forget that our children are the ones who video themselves jumping off of bridges just so they can upload it to the internet later, right? They live off of, and they thrive off of adrenaline and scares, whereas we were fearful. And so modern parenting suggests, hey, let's be real with our kids. Right? Scaring didn't work for a lot of people. Let's be real with you. And be honest, right? I see too many parents who make the mistake of trying to deny reality. And if you lie to your kids once, then you lose that credibility. So, the number one obstacle that I have in my office for helping children overcome addiction, helping young people, teenagers overcome addiction is what I call parental bliss. And that is when your son gets arrested for, $10,000 worth of methamphetamine, and you're sitting across my desk and you're saying, he is such a good boy, this is not who he is. No, ma'am, you're just living in parental bliss, because first time people don't start out buying $10,000 worth of methamphetamine. Or, if you want to change the scenario, he's lost 100 pounds in the last year, and he didn't do that because he's on the Slim Fast diet. So the number one problem I deal with is parents who refuse to admit reality. And what I will tell you is I've seen too many parents love their child to death. Earlier, one of the slides I put, I've been to more funerals than you have. And I promise you I have. I have been to more overdose death funerals than I care to remember. And too many times I've seen parents cry their eyes out, not because, certainly because their child had died, but it was compounded by the fact that they now wrestle with the grief of the fact that they enabled their child for far too long. By the way, I brought with me several copies of a book called Pride Aside. An acquaintance wrote this book, and I read it, and look, from a literary standpoint, it's probably terrible. It is grammatically, it's not well written. The sentence structure is poor, and the paragraphs are not put together well, and it doesn't flow well. But what it is a great diary of a man who spent 2/3 of this book detailing all the things he did wrong as a parent. And then the last third of the book, he finally says, the light went off, I set my pride aside, and I started dealing in reality. And so I offer this book a lot of times to people, and so I will gladly, I brought copies, and I was going to give some away, but I think what I'll do in the interest of time is, when you leave here today, there'll be a table out back. If you want a copy, just pick it up and take it with you. And I do think you'll benefit from it, because too many people, too many parents have too much pride to really be able to effectively help their children. And usually it all starts with, my child would never do that. My wife, her famous saying, don't ever say our daughters won't do something. And you know what? They will. And then know what you're talking about. I also see too many parents who try to bluff their way through these conversations. If you, methamphetamine is the worst opiate in the world. Well, it's not even an opiate, right? Everybody that smokes marijuana gets addicted. That's just not true. And I don't mean to minimize marijuana use. There are myths that parents try to perpetuate. And I think the danger is that when you don't know what you're talking about, your kids kind of give you an eye roll, and then they disregard your teaching from that point forward. And so I think it's incumbent on you as parents, and I celebrate you for being here tonight so that you can learn a little bit more. I do wish you had a better speaker than me, but I do celebrate you being here, and I just would encourage you to keep digging, to keep looking, and keep researching. I jokingly said you're not an expert because you spoke pot 3 times in high school, but I will very intentionally tell you that the pot that you smoked in high school is nothing like the pot that's on the market today. And so understand the nuances of what your kids are facing. Because oftentimes the things that I hear kids say as justification are the myths that their parents perpetuate. And those myths get perpetuated because parents don't really know the subject matter. So I put this slide in here very intentionally. All of these things are dangerous drugs. And if you don't stay educated, you don't realize that. You walk into your child's room and you see a bunch of gummy bears laying on their dresser and you think, oh, my kid likes gummy bears. I'll be sure to buy him some next time I go to Walmart. By the way, the kid's 27. Okay? The fact of the matter is that many illicit drugs are now packaged, manufactured, if you will, in the form of a gummy bear shape. And it's very difficult for a parent or law enforcement to discern whether or not that's a drug or whether or not that's a legitimate gummy bear. But it could be an indicator. It could be a warning sign. It needs to be something you're paying attention to. The top right, those are ecstasy pills. They are made in a lab by some guy named Guido who does not have a college degree and is following a formula that was written down on the back of a piece of toilet paper. And you have no idea whether it will kill you or not. The bottom left is what's called spice. Now I will tell you, spice in its most basic form, this is the educational part of the tour, by the way. Spice in its most basic form, the definition is this: dried vegetable matter that is laced with some chemical ingredient that when smoked will get you high. And so spice is not marijuana, it's not, it could be, it could be mixed with marijuana, but it's routinely just dried shredded lettuce, okay, that has been laced. And what is it commonly laced with? Just one picture less. Ray Roseburg. A few years ago, a woman came into Hart's Grocery, talking out of her mind. She was almost new. She knocked over several things in the store. Mr. Hart, still on the store then, him and Jimmy Wilson tried to help this lady because they knew she was medically in need. She stumbled out of the store. Mr. Hart went to call the police and to call 911 to get paramedics on the way. In the meantime, she goes outside and gets in Jimmy's truck and drives off. They find the truck a mile or two down the road. She has wandered out into the woods, taken off all of her clothes. By the way, she's doing this because her internal body temperature is rising. And she dies. When she gets to the hospital, her core body temperature was 107 degrees. And later we determined that what she had been doing was smoking spice that was laced with Ray Roseburg. Your kid buying a bunch of Ray Roseburg? There's your sign. But if you don't stay educated, if you don't stay knowledgeable, you don't recognize the fact that, yes, 3 empty cans of Ray in his bedroom is a sign, right? These, by the way, are all, I put this in here just as a, you see those Hershey bars and the Twix bars and the peppermint patty bars? Yeah, none of those say Hershey, Twix, or peppermint patty, but they are all packaged to look just like regular candy bars. Those are packaged to look just like Airheads. Those are packaged to look just like Jolly Ranchers. Those are all illicit drugs. And they are all readily available on the market today. And they're not hard to get. Your kids are hiding stuff in plain sight. And so you got to be paying attention to what's in their backpack. You got to be paying attention to what's in the center console of their car. These are the various, this is just a few. This is all marijuana. You say, wait a minute, that ain't the marijuana I smoke. That's kind of my point, right? By the way, some of this, to put it in statistics, marijuana in the 70s had about 3% THC. Marijuana today has about 20 to 25% THC. That's because it's been genetically engineered. It's no longer a plant. It's something that's grown in a lab, and It's just like people say Monsanto is the worst company in the world because they have genetically engineered all the agricultural products. Well, the marijuana growers have done the same thing with marijuana. But given the potency, one of the things that people often don't realize today is that you can have these, this crystalline substance or the oils or the hash, and you're talking about 70, 80, 90% THC. These are, if you want to look for a term, these are distilled forms of marijuana. They're very dangerous, they're very addictive, and they're very hard to find. Because you might pick that up and think, I didn't know my kid liked pralines. Right? I've talked intentionally a lot about marijuana, I've talked intentionally a lot about fentanyl. I'm going to talk intentionally a lot about opioids. 23% of student athletes report taking painkillers for a sports-related injury. I can give you time after time after time where I've talked to one of my best friends, played football at the University of Alabama. He wouldn't mind me sharing this name, Red Coleman. He's now the director at Crossover Ministries. Red Coleman started his journey to drug addiction because of a sports-related injury. And that sports-related injury led him to an opiate addiction, which led him eventually to prison. I can give you example after example after example of good kids, great athletes, great students with great intentions and fantastic futures who got sidetracked because they developed an opiate addiction. Now, as a parent, you know what the best advice I can give you is if your kid doesn't need a painkiller, don't give it to them. Right? Thankfully, we have some great doctors. Dr. Maddox won't prescribe opiates at all. Unfortunately, we have some other doctors that's their knee-jerk reaction. Oh, you have a cold, let me write you a prescription for Lortab. Do not let your kids take opiates if they don't need them. I will tell you, a few years ago, I use myself as an example, but not because I think I'm great, okay? A few years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a tumor in my eye. I went for the biopsy, which was necessary for the treatment, and I did not let them put me to sleep or give me painkillers because I am so fearful of what might happen. I don't take painkillers at all. If I do, it's Advil, and that's it. And sometimes it's hard, right? Sometimes it's painful. I'm getting older, my body's deteriorating. Sometimes I just want relief, but I cannot take the risk. If it's not necessary, don't let your kids do it. If it is necessary, if they are taking it, count their pills. Be the one that dispenses it to them. Don't give them a bottle full of pills and say, now do right. Right? Every morning at 7 o'clock, you give them their one pill for the day. At least be diligent in making sure that it's not being abused. The other thing I see kids do all the time, this is commonplace, not only everywhere else, but here too, is they have figured out that you can enhance the euphoric effect if you mix alcohol with opiates. It also becomes much more dangerous. Did you know that Alabama is number one in the world for opiate prescriptions per capita? It's number one in the world. And I don't mean the number one state in the world. I mean if you list every country and their opiate prescription rate, first of all, the United States is the most prescribed country in the world, but Alabama is the most prescribed state in the United States, which makes us number one in the world for our opiate prescription rates. And even scarier than that is that Cody County is number 8 in the counties in Alabama. Opiate addiction, opiate danger is very real, and it's right in our backyard. I always tell police chiefs when I'm speaking to them and sheriffs, if you don't police the big crimes, you won't be able to police if you don't police the small crimes, then you will have to police the big crimes and you won't be able to. Okay, and parenting is no different. One of the things that just, it blew up this past week, and I don't necessarily want to start another debate, but I was really taken aback last week when some kids were arrested for drinking. A parent discovered their child, a teenager, was at a residents and their teenager was drunk, and they called the police and said, hey, I just picked my child up from here, y'all need to do something. The police responded, and they arrested the kids that were there. And one of the things, look, and the issue, I don't bring this up to start a debate, I just bring this up to point out that there were parents on social media who were actively saying that children should not be arrested for drinking. If you don't police, if you don't parent the small issues, you will have to deal with the big issues. The other thing that I've never had a drug addict tell me is I just woke up one day and wanted to do methamphetamine, so I did it. The story is the same over and over and over. I ask thousands of drug addicts this because I am so thirsty for knowledge so I can help people. And I always ask, how did you start? What was the first drug you used? And 95% of the time the answer is alcohol. And then it progresses to marijuana, and then it progresses to pills. And what they all say this thing, it's called chasing the dragon, by the way, if you didn't know. It's a heroin use term, and that is because when you inject heroin into your arm, it burns. Hence the reference to the dragon. And so they call it chasing the dragon because you're always chasing the burn that you had the first time you ever used. And the euphoria, your body gets used to it. And so you have to ingest more and more and more. And if you've been around anybody that's an alcoholic, you've often wondered, how can that guy drink 18 beers and not be falling down? If I did that, I'd be dead on the floor, right? It's the same concept. It's because his body's been conditioned to drinking beer, and so he can handle it much more than we can. Well, drug use is no different. And so time and again, I ask people about their path to addiction. And it always starts with small crimes, and they get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger until it ends in disaster. And so parenting-wise, you got to police the small things. Because if you don't, you're just suggesting that it's okay to move to the next bigger crime. Look, unfortunately, have had to have very real conversations with parents where I basically said, I don't know why you're surprised. You let your kid drink in your house. You knew they were smoking marijuana, and you made this compromise and said, well, at least they're not doing cocaine. And now they're strung out on methamphetamine, and you want to act surprised, right? This was a very predictable outcome. And so if it's predictable, just avoid it, right? The best parenting you can use to stop addiction is to police it before it ever gets to the point of being an addiction. Unfortunately, far too many parents today want to be their kids' friends and not their parents. And so look, it's not my place to tell you such an intimate instruction, but I will tell you I'd much rather be my live child's parent than I would my dead child's friend. Right? Now, the reality is 1 + 1 does equal 2. Okay, there's a very predictable path for young people, and if you don't intervene at some point, I can almost predict the outcome for you, right? And so knowing that 1 + 1 does equal 2, the best thing you can do as a parent is start now. And put your foot down and say enough's enough. This is not how we're going to live. This is not how you were raised. And I don't want you to grow up to be X, Y, and Z. You plant seeds every day, right, with your children. And the hope is that they grow up to be strong, towering trees. Why in the world would you let somebody else's influence come cut that tree down? And that's exactly what a drug dealer hopes to do. Is they want to step into your role as parent and give your child life skills instructions. You don't need to worry about doing that. What you need to do is buy some more of this. Don't surrender the tree that you planted, and don't surrender your parental opportunities, because those people don't care about your child. I also want to mention other things to look for, because most drugs are now hidden in plain sight. The days of Cheech and Chong and the windows rolling down and marijuana smoke just billowing out, those days are long gone. Most kids ingest THC now by vaping. And so I tell parents all the time, like, if you've made this compromise with your child about vaping, then you really legitimately run the risk of them ingesting THC right in front of you, and you have no idea. And so, you know what, and there's no good solution for that. I can't test the vape and tell you if it's got THC. The only solution is to give your kid a drug test. So if you suspect it, then act on it. And I tell people, parents come in all the time, I thought I smelled marijuana, but you know, I know my kid better than that. Now, if you smell marijuana, you smell marijuana. It's just that simple. If you walk in my kitchen and you smell coffee, it's not because of the lettuce in the drawer. It's because there's coffee there. And so as a parent, please, please, please don't stick your head in the sand. If you see all the warning signs, set your pride aside and deal with it, right? Your kid comes home smelling like mouthwash, there's a reason for it, right? Your kid comes home at their curfew and they walk across the room like a robot and they can't blink and they refuse to come give you a hug and they run straight to their room, it's because they are trying to avoid you. Don't ignore all the warning signs and just intervene. And I'm not saying you got to bring down the wrath of God on them. Just have a real honest conversation with them. Go look in their car. Go search their trunk. Go look in the ashtray. Go look in their bedside table. It's okay. You're their parent. Here's one of the most common myths I hear is when it comes to parenting, your kids have no rights. You're their parent. You can search whatever you want to, and you should. So if you smell it, it's because you smell it. So act on it, right? I mentioned this earlier. You're not their friend, you're their parent. I love Charles Barkley. If you want some really true modern philosophy, just watch a few Charles Barkley videos. He's great. By the way, he's also the greatest basketball player to ever play at Auburn University, just had to throw that in. And I ran out of time, but I was going to put my contact information up there. Dr. Kelly, I appreciate very much you giving me this opportunity. I hope that I have satisfied your expectations. I welcome questions from anybody in the audience, and in fact would encourage them. I do encourage you, Miss Jeremy Schaefer here in the blue sweater, she'll have some of these books on the back, and I encourage you to get those on the way out. Also, I am going to do this. I brought these cards, I should have left them out back, but I will get these to the back table, and these are my business cards, and I spend as much of my time dealing with addiction as I do anything else because it's my life's passion. Right? Like I didn't dwell a lot on my family upbringing, but the reality is that the only reason I'm here today is because the good Lord decided to take me out of where I was at and bring me to a place where He thought He could use me. Because otherwise, I would just have continued to walk in the footpath and the footsteps I was raised to walk in. And so, when I tell you you can come to my office and I sit down with you and talk to you about all the problems you're having with your son or your daughter or your brother or your father, I will, because it is my life's passion. And so I hope that you'll take me up on that. So I'm going to make sure that these cards are up there too. I promise you, call me. I'll take whatever time you need. I'll get your loved one the help they need. I mentioned crossover, but I have contacts all over the state. By the way, as a matter of office policy, anybody who pleads guilty to a drug crime with our office has to go to treatment, right? Because that's our main priority. We want to fix the problem. And I'd love to fix the problem before it ever gets to the court system. And so please, 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 come see. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walt. I know those stats were sobering to me. I had no idea, and that was a phenomenal presentation, so thanks, Walt. Thank you again for coming. I know I'm going to invite Jenny and Dr. Lipinski back up here. We have some door prizes. Don't forget, we will not be in session next week, but April 4th, we will be returning back here. Noah Galloway is coming to speak. Noah actually was on Dancing with the Stars and on the cover of Men's Health, and he has agreed to come speak. So invite your friends. We're excited about him coming, and I will invite Jenny and Dr. Lipinski up for some door prizes. Don't forget, if you didn't sign in, please sign in. Thank you again, Walt. Phenomenal information, and I can't say enough about the importance of that information he just delivered, so thank you.
Our first door prize is a free oil change. This is up to a $96 value, courtesy of Step 1 Automotive in Andalusia. And the ticket number is 6611396. 396?
I think that's mine. I can't read all much. I was trying to dig it from our Okay.
I'm so happy I'm not the only one who's like, lend me your good eyes, your young eyes.
Alright, the next door prize is very cool. It's a cast iron skillet courtesy of Power South. And that is for ticket 393. Power South has also donated to us an insulated casserole tube, and that is for ticket 405. And the last door prize also from Power South is a 25-foot extension cord, ticket 400.
The ends even light up to let you know that you have power.
Easy.
I'm getting a little power hungry myself here. Our prizes.
Alright, our next door prize is a Brew Buddy large cup insulated cozy and Siberian mint face scrub courtesy of Holmes Piton. And that's for ticket 399.
This is a good Saturday morning, is it? Yes. A cozy made for your favorite, like larger beverage. Very luxurious. Thanks.
All right, these next two are free pizzas courtesy of Little Caesars, and these are for tickets 397 and 407.
Yeah. There we go.
It's my favorite dinner. Everybody loves Little Caesars. All right. The next is a coupon for 2 free smoothies courtesy of Tropical Smoothie Cafe, and that's for ticket 394.
She's sending you up for everyone over. Put together.
Okay, next we've got a free umbrella courtesy of Power South, and that's for ticket 402.
Something you can never have too many of in South Alabama, I found. Thank you.
And the last is an LBW swag bag. It includes a water bottle, drink cozy, a plush blue, and that's not if you've not met blue yet, fantastic. And some other goodies, and that's for ticket 404.
Yes, there are some surprises in here.
Big thank you to all of our sponsors for donating these items.
And just real quick, before we let everybody go, I just wanted to make sure that we know who is out in the lobby and what resources they're here offering. So we have the Covington County Children's Policy Council and Mrs. Susan Shore. Yeah, she will be out front. She has some information, as the executive director, she has some information about their grant-funded, nationally recognized organization that uses data-driven information to identify initiatives that help target youth drug abuse and awareness and support healthier young folks in our communities. Then we also have, I believe DA Merrell mentioned, we have Jeremy Schaefer, hear from a very new group that has started at the DA's office. We're usually totally understanding that once somebody has been identified as an offender, they go into work with a drug abuse program. Ms. Jeremy is part of a group that is trying to target low-level offenders before they get to that point where then they are now considered an offender. The great thing I noticed about what they will be doing is also helping to identify resources, things like housing, employment, education, and recovery. So treating the whole family and everybody to, yes, and I think that might be the key to many of what DA Merrell said, is that a healthy family helps to produce healthy children who can make good decisions. We also have South Central Alabama Mental Health. This is Kiana Farrell. Here's something kind of cool you might want to stop by our table and talk about. They offer on Thursdays between 8 and 3 p.m. It's basically like a walk-in service where you bring your ID, your social, and your insurance card, and you can meet with a therapist. That's a really valuable bit of information to have. And then Celebrate Recovery. We have Karen Kay here this evening. This is a program that has a long history nationwide, and they meet at the Methodist Church downtown, right? Yes, and First Methodist on Thursdays. This is a good thing to know because I know we have been focused on drug and alcohol abuse. Their program is designed not only to assist folks with drug and alcohol abuse issues, but possibly things like anger, abuse that they may be experiencing, codependency, grief, difficult relationships. They also have childcare and an optional affordable dinner. And you start that at 5:15, right? And then the small groups meet at 6 on Thursdays. So if any of that sounds like something you want to know more about, for yourself, for somebody you love, for a friend, or just to have that in your toolbox if you need it, please stop and talk with our groups that are in the lobby before you go. Okay? Thank you so much for attending tonight.